South Sudanese opposition leader Riek Machar to return to Juba for a peace ceremony after 2 years in exile. The U.S. midterm campaign enters its final week amid tension and uncertainty. We'll tell you what's at stake. And flexible electronics capable of changing the way we live and the way we use technology. We'll explain. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Esther Gidui. You're in for Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. South Sudanese opposition leader Riek Machar returned to the capital Juba on Wednesday to celebrate a peace deal more than 2 years after fierce fighting erupted in the city and forced him to flee the country. Machar flew in with his wife and a small group of advisors, but none of his troops. He then met his longtime rival, President Salva Kiir, and regional leaders who have spent years pressing the two men to end their civil war. South Sudan plunged into conflict in 2013 after Kiir fired Machar as vice president. Machar fled to neighboring Democratic Republic of Congo in 2016 after fighting broke out again, wrecking an earlier peace deal and killing hundreds. Following intense pressure from governments in East Africa, the United Nations and Western donors, Machar's group, other rebel factions, and the government last month signed a peace deal under which he will again become vice president. President Kiir says an imprisoned South African advisor to Machar and a rebel group spokesman would be released on Thursday as part of the peace deal. The movement of a jailed Nigerian Shiite cleric whose followers have repeatedly clashed with the authorities said Wednesday that security forces have so far killed 42 of its members during 2 days of violent crackdowns on protests in Abuja. On Tuesday, police opened fire at members of the Islamic Movement of Nigeria, also known as IMN, who are demanding the release of their leader, Ibrahim Zakzaki. Zakzaki has been jailed since December 2016 and held without charges, despite a court ruling that he be released. When the IMN protesters refused to turn back, police fired tear gas on the crowd. As the violence escalated, at least one member of the group was wounded by gunfire, while other protesters set a police car on fire. At least 2 people were killed and 15 others wounded on Tuesday in Guinea's capital, Conakry, as political protests intensify. Witnesses say in some neighborhoods, like the opposition stronghold of Dixin, angry protesters tried to set up barricades and burn tires before they were dispersed by police. The violence is linked to opposition fears that President Alpha Condé may seek to change the constitution to seek a third term in the 2020 elections. Condé has declined to comment on his intentions. Local government elections should have been held in February 2017 as agreed in a deal signed by Condé, opposition parties and civil society in October 2016. The delay pushed thousands of critics of President Condé into the streets of Conakry as political tensions escalated. Meanwhile, opposition leader Selou Diallo says he has been prevented from leaving his home as armed police blocked his house and prevented supporters from going to his home. Now, as the December elections approach in the Democratic Republic of Congo, concerns are being raised over the integrity of electronic voting machines being used in the national poll that were made by South Korea's Miru systems. VOA Steve Miller reports from Seoul on the risks.
The Democratic Republic of Congo is poised to see the arrival of long-delayed elections December 23rd, as longtime President Joseph Kabila is due to step down after 17 years in power. DRC election officials say machines by South Korean technology company Miru Systems are vital to holding the polls. The Electoral Commission says the machines will speed up vote counting, where past elections have been marred by voting irregularities or violence. But opposition party members and Catholic bishops have called for the machines to be inspected by international experts over concerns the devices might enable fraud.
Right now, we're not afraid of anything, but sometimes people can steal with this machine here.
His sentiment was shared last week by protesters who filled the streets shouting, "Voting machine equals cheating machine." Miru Systems, located just south of Seoul and Pangyo, declined VOA's interview request, but responded to the controversy in a statement to local media. CEO Chung Jin-bok said the concern about its voting machines stemmed from not fully understanding how they worked. Chung said even with the introduction of an electronic voting and ballot counting system, a paper ballot system is still present. He added that it will enhance the reliability of the election by recording votes 3 times, on a touchscreen machine, at the central server, and on paper. However, Sung-Ju Kim, a professor of information security at Korea University, told VOA that electronic voting machines, like any other computer systems, can be compromised.
Even if you secure the data on the touchscreen, a server, and ballot, companies can't control how the elections are conducted and therefore should not promise vote integrity.
Election officials feel confident they are ready to proceed with December elections that many consider a crucial step towards ending the political instability that is impeding investment in a country with widespread poverty, economic, and humanitarian crises.
After the explanations and simulation of the vote and the answers to the various questions, we feel that the understanding and acceptance of the voting machine is no longer a problem.
Steve Miller, VOA News, Seoul.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is calling for a cessation of hostilities in Yemen. He also says a United Nations-led negotiations to end the civil war should begin next month. Ryan Brooks has our report.
The U.S. is calling for an end to Yemen's 3-year war, pressing for the start of UN-backed peace negotiations next month. Washington currently supports the Saudi-backed coalition in Yemen by refueling its jets and providing training. However, previous attempts to end U.S. support for the Saudi campaign have been killed in the Senate. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Tuesday that missile and drone strikes by Iran-allied rebels and the airstrikes on populated areas by a Saudi-backed coalition must stop to alleviate one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. 3/4 of Yemen's population are in need of aid, and more than 8 million people are on the brink of starvation. Its civil war pits the Houthi rebels against the internationally recognized Yemeni government that's backed by Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and the West. Pompeo said, quote, "The time is now for the cessation of hostilities." U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis also lent support to the motion, saying Tuesday that the Saudis and Emiratis appeared ready to negotiate a solution to the conflict. He added all sides need to take steps towards a ceasefire within the next 30 days.
Reuters' Ryan Brooks filed that report. Search and rescue crews may have located the wreckage of an Indonesian jetliner that crashed into the Java Sea just minutes after taking off from Jakarta early Monday morning, as families whose loved ones were on board the flight arrived at a port in northern Jakarta on Wednesday to identify their belongings. Indonesia's military chief said Wednesday that authorities strongly believe they have pinpointed the resting place of Lion Air Flight JT610, which disappeared from radar screens after taking off on a flight to nearby Bangka Belitung Island. Locating the wreckage will put search crews one step closer to recovering the plane's cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorders, which will provide crucial information on why the pilots asked to return to the airport shortly after takeoff. All 189 passengers and crew were killed in the crash. Indonesia's Transport Ministry has ordered an inspection of all the new 737 MAX 8 jets. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Still ahead on Africa 54, electronics flexes into the future. But first, a look at Wednesday's headlines.
In South Sudan, rebel leader Riek Machar has returned to the capital Juba for the first time in 2 years to attend a peace ceremony celebration hosted by his longtime rival, President Salva Kiir. In Nigeria, police opened fire at Shiite Muslim protesters demanding the release of their leader in the capital, Abuja, on Tuesday in a second straight day of violence. In Germany, Chancellor Angela Merkel holds closed-door talks with African Union chairperson on Wednesday. In South Africa, raging wildfires have killed several people along the country's famed garden route and destroyed thousands of fields of vegetation. Finally, a new research indicates that the African bush elephant's vast network of deep wrinkles is designed to help them keep their cool, fight off parasites, and protect the animals from sun damage.
U.S. President Donald Trump resumes his schedule of campaign rallies on Wednesday, one day after he and First Lady Melania Trump visited the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, where a gunman massacred 11 worshippers during Saturday's Sabbath prayers. The president and Mrs. Trump were accompanied by his son-in-law Jared Kushner and daughter Ivanka Trump, who converted to Judaism when she married Kushner. Donald and Melania Trump placed a stone at each of the 11 Stars of David set up outside the synagogue. Placing stones at a grave or remembrance site is an ancient Jewish tradition. A large crowd of protesters who do not believe Trump's visit was appropriate marched near the synagogue.
I think the president's visit was very much a distraction. I think it detracts from our ability as a neighborhood to go and mourn.
If he didn't come, they would also have something to say. He didn't have the decency to come. It's a difficult, I wouldn't even walk into that because of the bloodshed that was in there.
The demonstrators, along with some politicians and Jewish leaders, wanted Trump to stay away from Pittsburgh until he firmly denounces white nationalism. The first victims of the massacre were buried Tuesday. Ilhan Omar, who fled civil war in Somalia and spent 4 years of her childhood in a refugee camp in Kenya, is now poised to win a seat in the U.S. Congress, taking on a president who has tried to prevent people like her from coming to America. The Democratic state legislator is heavily favored to win her Minneapolis-based district over Republican Jennifer Zielinski in the November 6th congressional elections, which could potentially make her one of the first Muslim women elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Omar, a 36-year-old naturalized American citizen, says she is running for office to make sure fewer people have to struggle with the daily necessities of life, something she was shocked to find when she arrived in America as a refugee with her family at age 12. Omar is campaigning on policies embraced by the most liberal wing of the Democratic Party: universal health care, free college tuition, robust public housing that are popular in a district that has not elected a Republican to the House since 1962. Now, with less than 1 week to go before a crucial U.S. midterm congressional election, Americans are on edge after a massacre at a Jewish synagogue in Pittsburgh and the arrest of a man charged with sending pipe bombs to prominent Democrats. Voters are set to elect a new Congress on November 6th, and the results could shift the balance of power in Washington and have a profound impact on the next 2 years of Donald Trump's presidency. Here's VOA's Jim Malone.
In Pittsburgh, a tearful vigil for the victims of the mass shooting at the Tree of Life synagogue. From President Trump, a condemnation of violence and a plea for unity.
We condemn the historic evil of anti-Semitism and every other form of evil. And unfortunately, evil comes in many forms. And we come together as one American people.
The synagogue shooting and the arrest of a man charged with sending pipe bombs to prominent Democrats and Trump critics have heightened tensions and uncertainty in the final days of the midterm campaign, says analyst John Hudak.
Well, the country is in pain. This is a set of circumstances that unfortunately happens in America all too regularly. That is, acts of violence and acts of aggression toward fellow Americans by Americans.
Hey folks, how are you?
Former Vice President Joe Biden is among those calling for calm.
I know sometimes these days the anger, the hatred, the viciousness seem like they're going to overwhelm us. And it's on our leaders to set the tone, to dial down the temperature, to restore some dignity to our national dialogue.
A vote for Democrats is also a vote
to destroy Medicare.
Some Democrats say the president's partisan attacks have contributed to the politically charged atmosphere. Not true, says White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders.
The very first thing the media did was blame the president and make him responsible for these ridiculous acts. That is outrageous that would be the very first reaction.
For his part, Trump has vowed to campaign aggressively right up to Election Day on issues important to his supporters, like immigration.
The Democrat Party is openly encouraging millions of illegal aliens to break our laws, violate our borders, and bankrupt our country. That's what has to happen.
I did 50 town halls. You know what people talked about in those town halls? Health care.
Democrats have focused on health care for much of the campaign, but Trump also looms large, says Jim Kessler.
Democrats want to make this about health care and the tax bill and about Donald Trump. And let's face it, this is going to be about Donald Trump.
You all ready? Democrats expect to make gains in the House of Representatives, but Republicans are favored to hold their narrow majority in the Senate, says John Fortier.
And some of what has happened in recent days with the Kavanaugh hearings and Republicans kind of coming home as a party are helping in that area. So it'll be mostly a win for Democrats, but with a probably bright spot in the Senate for Republicans.
The stakes are enormous. A Democratic House could block the Trump agenda and launch numerous investigations of the Trump White House, complicating the president's re-election hopes in 2020. Jim Malone, VOA News, Washington.
A just-released report from the World Wildlife Fund details a rapid decline in the world's biodiversity. In general, the percentage of all kinds of animals on land, sea, and air have declined rapidly since 1970. VOA's Kevin Enochs reports.
The statistics are stark and alarming.
Populations of mammals, of birds, of fish declined between 1970 and the year 2014 by 60% globally. And in freshwater habitats, the figure is some 83%.
And it's no surprise that human activity is mainly to blame.
Human activity is the driver of the declines we're seeing, primarily our demand, our increasing demand for food, energy, water.
That activity is driving climate change, but the authors say there are lessons we can learn from how the world came together to act on curbing greenhouse gases.
When we think about how the world responded to the climate threat and forged a pact in Paris in 2015 to address climate change, we need a similar deal at the global level for people and nature.
And Cesario points to success stories like the giant panda's recovery and the rising population of tigers in the wild as proof that what is happening is reversible.
The report is very sobering. I think the message is also that it's not too late to course correct. Life is resilient, it bounces back, and so if we take concerted action, we can reverse these trends and ensure a living planet for future generations.
To help life bounce back, the World Wildlife Fund is calling on governments to sign on to a Convention on Biological Diversity in 2020. It creates a pathway to conserve the world's wild places and reverse the planet's shrinking biodiversity.
And it has set targets for things like percentage of area to be protected under parks and indigenous reserves and other types of community conserved areas.
The WWF says all of the resources the Earth provides us in terms of food, lumber, and energy, for instance, all told are worth about $125 trillion a year. The goal now is to find a way to make all that rich, natural biodiversity sustainable and available for generations to come. Kevin Enochs, VOA News.
Each October, fans of comics, graphic novels, and manga, Japanese comics, descend on New York for Comic-Con, a highlight of the International Pop Culture Festival in cosplay. Cosplayers dress as characters from their favorite comics, and this year, as reporter Asla Pelit discovered, there were more women in costume. VOA's Faith Lapidus narrates.
Move over, Superman, Batman, and Aquaman. Make room for Wonder Woman and She-Hulk. Female superheroes and characters were well represented among the 250,000 visitors at New York Comic Con.
So whether it's like a reflection from where society has been going with the news, you know, women empowerment and stuff like that, there's been a flux of characters. And not only that, but they're like putting new life into the old female characters that didn't get a lot of like time. So now they're giving them a chance to be front and center. So it's a really cool time to be in comics.
I do think there's more female superheroes, and my favorite female superhero is Storm or Wonder Woman.
This year, one of the trends is crossplay, meaning cosplay as the opposite gender. Guys dressed up as famous female characters, such as Ren from Star Wars, while girls chose traditionally male costumes for their cosplay outfits.
It's a really nice environment where you can switch between, you know, doing a male character and then a female character. And, you know, no one will treat you differently. Like,
sometimes the look on their faces when they do figure out you are female is kind of funny.
It is.
Yeah, that's always a good sign you've done it right.
New York Comic Con attracts thousands of comic lovers and artists every year and is one of the most important platforms for new artists. Some of them introduce characters breaking barriers, like a gender-fluid girl ambulance driver.
I think that there's a general wave, a great wave of trying to to make stories that reflect the world we live in. Look, I'm a white dude, but we need to see more people of color. We need to see more women. We need to look at the books and on the pages see the same thing that we see around us. And I think we're getting better. I think it's happening, and there's more and more happening to this day.
So while the old superheroes are here to stay, we'll be seeing more women stepping up to help save the world, at least in the comics. For Asla Palit in New York, I'm Faith Lapidus, VOA News.
Advancements in digital printing are leading to more sophisticated, flexible electronics capable of changing the way we live and the way we use technology. Dana Mitchell takes a look at the latest technological innovations at a research center in San Jose, California.
Antennas that bend and fold like paper?
It is a printed antenna that is on an origami substrate.
Or a lithium-ion battery that rolls up? It sounds like science fiction, but these are examples of flexible hybrid electronics. Electronics made with flexible, bendable, super thin circuitry.
So Boeing proposed that you could create an antenna that would be very thin, very flexible, and could be operated at multiple different frequencies.
Researchers say they are also easier and cheaper to make.
It's all digital technology. So you design it, you design your circuit, and you just put that information straight into the printer, and it prints.
NextFlex, a consortium of companies formed to develop new applications for flexible technology, is working closely with the U.S. Defense Department. Their arsenal includes a specially designed printer from Japan that prints circuit lines 1/5 the width of a human hair. It can be used on applications that require lightweight strength and flexibility.
This can be mounted on the edge of a building. We could measure the stress and strain on a building in high wind conditions to know that the energy from a windstorm hitting the edge of a building is going to be catastrophic before the catastrophe happens.
It can also be used to monitor dangerous activities.
This biometric band, what the band does is it monitors a remote worker. So for example, somebody is working in a hazardous environment, they might be wearing this band, and it's monitoring their physiological functions continuously and transmitting that to a paired smartphone.
It's a new technology that promises to conform to humans and not the other way around. Dina Mitchell for VOA News, San Jose, California.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. Now, Apple refreshed some of its lesser-known products this week, adding iPhone features like facial recognition to the iPad Pro and faster processors and better displays to some Mac computers that had gone years without a major update. The devices will hit stores on November 7th. counting new iPhones and Apple Watches released last month. Apple introduced new versions of the iPad Pro, its higher-end tablet that compares with Microsoft Surface, with thinner bezels and some screen space, along with the face unlock systems found on Apple's newer iPhones. Prices for the iPad Pros increased to $799 and $999 for 11 and 12.9-inch models, although Apple plans to keep an older 10.5-inch version on sale for $649. Next up, to fight against the high cost of fuel and pollution, a new initiative known as Emoto is testing the use of electric motorbikes in Rwanda's capital, Kigali. Developed by AMSAD, a U.S.-Rwandan electric vehicle company, the project aims to provide a low-cost and environmentally friendly mode of transport, especially for motorcycle taxi riders. Many Rwandans have increasingly been using motorbikes as taxis to avoid relatively expensive fares and traffic congestion. In East Africa alone, more than 3 million people earn their livelihood as motorcycle drivers. E-motos are expected to cost between $1,300 and $1,400 US compared to $1,900 for a gasoline-operated motor vehicle. And finally, the film Thea from Nigerian-born director Emoto tells the story of 3 people who journey from their rural homes in South Africa to Johannesburg. As Michael Sullivan reports, it is a story of migration that deals with universal themes.
It is a story of lost innocence and betrayal.
Thea tells the story of 3 strangers who get on a train, each of them with a mission to fulfill in Johannesburg. They're coming from Durban to Johannesburg. They never meet, but their stories are intertwined.
Each traveler has a mission, and each faces rejection, abuse, or violence. This coming-of-age film originated from real stories of South Africans in the Homeless Writers Project, a workshop for people living on the streets. Thea means to go in the dialect of South African townships.
It takes on several meanings. So to go, they're leaving Durban to go to Johannesburg, but then when you get there, you know, maybe people don't want you to leave, so they want you to go, you know, so it really covers the, I'll say, the spirit of the projects.
Emoto is a migrant himself. He was born in Nigeria, but his family moved to South Africa, where he studied drama. Then he worked as an actor and director. Thea is one of 20 films from filmmakers of color and women directors distributed by Array, an arts collective and distribution company founded by Hollywood filmmaker Ava DuVernay.
Our purpose is to make sure that audiences have access to films they otherwise would not see, those independent voices that deserve a platform for stories to be told.
Thea has played at international festivals and opened at theaters in the United States in October. It will also stream on Netflix starting November 1st. The director says this South Africa-based film tells a story that many can relate to.
That's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. Thank you for watching. Good night.
Welcome to English in a Minute. This expression sounds like a violent way of eating, but it's actually not always about eating.
Here is your Russian book, Anna. Thanks for letting me borrow it.
Oh, are you done with level 1 already?
Yeah, I finished last week, and I've already finished level 2.
Wow, you are really sinking your teeth into learning Russian.
Well,